Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be measuring the ROI from the beginning of each year through that year. So year to date, basically, for this year, and then looking at that same metric every year going back to 2011. We obviously don't include 2010 because I only have price data, reliable price data, starting pretty late in 2010. So we're starting with 2011 and going through 2020. It is somewhat arbitrary, I would agree, to use the first of the year as your reference point for any given year, but this is what is used by a lot of people. Obviously, the year-to-date metric, which you'll see on a lot of different assets. So we're going to use it in this video. Of course, we also look at the running ROI and many other things on this channel. But this is just one video to help us, put the puzzle pieces together. So if you guys like the content, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. We try to do things a little bit differently around here, look more at custom charts, data science, quantitative finance, modern portfolio theory, but of course we also do pull up TradingView from time to time. So in this video, we have the yearly ROI on a logarithmic scale. So if you're not familiar with this, 10 to the 0 is just 1. So if the ROI of any given year is less than 1, it means you saw you basically experienced a loss on that investment. It might not be a realized loss, but at least on paper you were down for the year. Now, if it's up here at 10 to the 1, this means a 10x. So if it's above this line, it means you saw a 10x had you purchased on the first of that year and then sold at the end of that year. And then 10 to the 2 would be 100, so 100x. And then 10 to the minus 1 would be 0.1, meaning there's not a year where from the beginning of the year to the end of the year it ended at this level. But of course, we do know that from certain reference points, there have been 80 to 90% drops in the price of Bitcoin within a certain period of time. But again, this video is just focused on as measured from the first day of the year, so January 1st, and then what the ROI was for that year going forward. So it looks kind of messy when you plot out all the years, but we can actually show it in a little bit in a bit of better way. So one of the things we can do is we can look at the yearly ROI for years where the ROI was greater than 10. Okay, and this means from the beginning, as measured from the beginning to the end of the year. So you can see there were 3 years where this occurred: 2011, 2013, and 2017. So in 2011, it actually went up to over 100x at one point, but it still managed to finish the year at over a 10x ROI on your investment. In 2013, it also went up almost to 100x, but ultimately it finished off the year at a modest 50 or 60x or so. And then the last one is in 2017, where it more or less systematically increased throughout the entire year to finish off somewhere between 10 to 20x. And we know this is the case because, this one is a market cycle or a bull market that many of you guys experienced because it was only a few years ago. So we see that there's 3 key years where the ROI as measured from January 1st yielded over 10x as measured on December 31st at the end of that year. Now, we can highlight that and look at it like this. We can also show that there were 2 years that saw an ROI in which you would have lost money. So out of all 10 years that we have, so 2011 to 2020, out of all 10 years, there were only 2 years where had you bought Bitcoin on January 1st, you would have experienced or have seen a loss by the end of the year. Okay, only 2 years. Many of you guys know what years those were: 2014 and 2018. Okay, and you can see both of them at some point were slightly above break even, but they ultimately just trended down for the duration of the entire year. So it is somewhat arbitrary to measure it from the starting point of that year, but it is interesting to see that both of these basically just trended down for the duration of that year. Now, this one obviously is the regime where the ROI is less than 1. So clearly, ideally speaking, of course hindsight's 2020, but ideally speaking, you would not be investing in Bitcoin in years where it's just trending down, of course. But how can we know that ahead of time? Well, of course, if you follow this channel, we try to do the best we can to identify years, try to best identify the different types of years that can occur. So if we put these together, so now all we're showing are the years where we had a bull market. So, and by bull market, I mean, I should be clear, it needs to have had an ROI of 10 or more. Okay. And of course, an ROI of 2 or 3 in a given year would be considered a bull market. But for the purposes of this video, we're just breaking it up into losses and then years that experienced at least a 10x ROI. And then you can see that this covers half of the year. So 2011, 2013, 2014, 2017, and 2018 are either described as seeing more than a 10x or a loss. Okay. So then if we highlight these, we can see, okay, well, there's this big regime in here where none of these years go. So let's plot those. Well, when we do that, you can see that it corresponds to the other 5 years. And 2020 is not completely in the record books yet, but it looks like it will fall within this category. There's 5 years, 2012, 2015, 2016, 2019, and 2020. One of the things you notice, though, is that despite the fact that we're leaving the entire regime from an ROI of 1 to 10 as this category, it turns out that all of these other years that were not a 10x ROI or not a loss actually had an ROI between 1.3 and 2.6. Okay, so despite the fact that there could have been ROIs as measured from January 1st of any given year, from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9x, not a single year has yielded an ROI of that amount since inception of Bitcoin. In fact, everything, we know that 3 of the years, 2011, 2013, and 2017, were above 10. 2014 and 2018 were below 1, so bad years. And then the other 5 years are what I would consider to be accumulation territory, okay? And you might say, well, an ROI of 2.6 is a lot, and I agree, it is a lot. But still, when Bitcoin is slowly trending upwards, you could argue that it still is somewhat of an accumulation year, right? You can say, well, it was still before the final year where it really took off. It was still, say, within our logarithmic regression band that we like to talk about on the channel. Therefore, during that year, it was actually a decent time to be accumulating Bitcoin, okay? And these were all years that were between 1.3 and 2.6. And we know that accumulating Bitcoin in 2014 and 2018, for the most part, was not a good idea. Of course, you could argue, well, if you started accumulating it at the very end of those years, you could have actually seen a pretty decent ROI in the short term. But all we're looking at right now is trying to identify the years as what they are, right? So we have 3 years that are over 10x. We have 2 years that saw a loss, and the other 5 years were between an ROI of 1.3 and 2.6. And this is a great reason why Bitcoin, as you can see, has been such a great investment. Out of the last 10 years, there's only 2 years where you would have experienced a loss at the end of the year had you bought at the beginning. So we are here within 2020. You might wonder, well, how are we here? It feels like it's been a really great year for Bitcoin. But short-term memory loss, if you guys remember, the price of Bitcoin on January 1st wasn't too different from where it is today. I think it was around between $7,000 and $8,000 or so. So yes, we went down to 3,800, but as measured from the beginning of the year, we're not that much higher. Okay, obviously we're not even 2x higher, because a 2x would obviously mean we would need to be somewhere between 14 and 15K or so. We're not even there. Might even be a little bit higher than 15 depending on where it was in the 7,000s. But the point is that this year, as I've said many, many times, and I've said on my channel many times, 2019, 2020, and I even think so, 2021 will be the accumulation years of this market cycle. Okay, so we are currently here. I would anticipate there's a good chance that we will, in the year, with an ROI as measured from January 1st between 1.3 and 2.6, as we've seen all these others. Of course, it might not. It could come back down, or it could go above it. But there's a pretty good chance. It seems like there's a pretty decent chance that it's going to do so. And to give you an idea why, if we end the year between 93.53 and 18,707, as measured where I got the reference point for my data, then we would end the year between 1.3 and 2.6. So I think there's a pretty good chance that the price of Bitcoin finishes the year between these two values. And if I had to guess, I would say it'd be closer to, this value than this value. But I could be wrong. I mean, it could be, we could finish the year maybe somewhere in between. I think there's a better chance that we finish it closer to around, maybe 10,000 to 12,000, maybe 13,000 or so, somewhere in that ballpark. I don't really anticipate the price of Bitcoin getting close to 20,000 by the end of this year. Okay, I don't anticipate it getting close to 20,000 by the end of this year. Now, if we look at everything, we can see that again there's a huge gap here, right? If we narrow these down to just this area, we can see there's a huge gap between an ROI of approximately 3 all the way up to a little over 10x. Okay. Now, one of the things we can do to look at this in a fairly different way is to plot out the years. So we have all the years over here. We right next to it if it's a bull, a bear, or an accumulation phase. Okay. So, and again, I'm calling a bull market in this context as anything that experienced a 10x ROI from January 1st of that year. Okay. And in this context, we see that we had a bull here, and then a bull here. So, looks like it lengthened a good bit. Okay, if we're just measuring it from a year-to-date perspective, I get that this is somewhat arbitrary, but this is just one more tool we can use in our toolbox. It's not meant to be all-encompassing. I'm sure some of you might say, well, you should measure, the running ROI. Well, we did that too, right? It's all over the channel, but this one is just focused on year-to-date stuff. So we have bull here, 2011, bull 2013, bull 2017. So we can kind of see it's elongating a little bit between these cycles that we see at 10x. If we look at bears, we can see we've only had 2. And that is indicated by years where the ROI went down from where it started from. So 2014 and 2018. Then if we look at accumulation phases, we can see, okay, well, and by the way, an accumulation phase is measured in this instance as an ROI that's between 1 and 10. It turns out that all of them actually happen to be 1.3 and 2.6, but the way that I initially was measuring it was just between 1 and 10. Okay, and obviously if it had been a 9x ROI, you might say, well, that's clearly a bull market. And if we had a 9x ROI, maybe I would have broken it up in a slightly different way. But because it happened to come out like this in such a nice methodical way where everything that was down here was pretty tightly packed, and then you had bear markets and then bull market, amazing bull market years, it seemed prudent to just group them like this. So we see bull, accumulation, bull, bear. Accumulation, accumulation, bull, bear. Accumulation, accumulation. Okay? So I would argue that there's a good chance in the same manner that we're going to actually have another accumulation year. So my anticipation is that 2021 will also be an accumulation year and will continue to lengthen what we're calling this accumulation phase. And what does that mean? Does it mean that the price of Bitcoin will stay constant at like $10,000? It does not necessarily mean that. If you remember, all it means is that we will have an ROI between less than 10 and more than 1. And I would contend that it probably would fall somewhere again between 1.3 and 2.6, probably at least between say 1 and 3. Now, if it were up at the upper range of that, right? So if we take a look at some of the upper ones, we can see that it could yield a 2x ROI. So imagine for ease of understanding, let's suppose that the price of Bitcoin ended the year at exactly $10,000. Well, even if it saw 2x and went to $20,000 by the end of 2021, it would still be considered to be within this accumulation zone. So between an ROI of 1.3 and 2.6, it would still be within that regime. And this is what I think. I think that 2021 will still be, as we look back on it from say 2023, from the perspective of say 2023 or 2024, when we look back, we'll say, yeah, it looks like 2021 was also just another accumulation year. Okay, this is what I think, all right? Now, a lot of you, understandably, might say, well, I think that the next year will be a 10x ROI. Maybe you think that you believe in some of the other models that show Bitcoin going to an insane amount in 2021. And you guys know that I've been very critical of those models. Perhaps I should try to tone down the criticism a little bit, but it's really hard not to, because I think that It's completely, those models are just completely flawed. But be that as it may, if you were to see a 10x ROI this coming year, so in 2021, then we would, if the price of Bitcoin were $10,000 and we saw 10x, it would put us up in this regime, and then 2021 could be labeled as a bull market. But I'm saying I think there's a much better chance, a much higher probability that 2021 will be remembered as just another accumulation year as we continue to methodically work our way back up to the prior all-time high. This is what I think. Obviously, I could be wrong. Now, another thing is there's a chance that we could see an ROI less than 1. Well, what does that mean? Well, if the price of Bitcoin were $10,000 on January 1st and it just ended the year, ended 2021 at say 9,500, then we would be in this regime. Another way that we could theoretically get here is, well, what happens if the price of Bitcoin explodes now and goes up to say $18,000? And then we end 2021 at like say $14,000 or $16,000. Well, then it would also be down here. So my contention is that the probability that the ROI is less than 3 is so much greater than the probability that it's greater than 3. So I really don't think it's going to be anywhere up in this regime in 2021. I think that we do have at least another accumulation year to go. With that said, there's a good chance that this market cycle starts to fill in some of these ROIs in this regime, so between 3 and 5. So what this could mean is, well, if 2021 is met with another accumulation year, and let's suppose we get to around $20,000 by the end of the year, I think that it's probably more likely to get to at least a sustainable 20K by the beginning of 2022, but it doesn't mean we can't reach 20K by sometime in 2021 and in the year at 20K. So if that's the case, if we end the year at 20K and we see a 2x ROI, well then where does that leave us for 2022 and 2023, 2024? Well, if what I think, right, I think that 2023 will be the major market, but remember, I do think cycles are lengthening. So it could be that there's not a single year of this market cycle that gives us a 10x ROI. Now, as measured from the bottom, or maybe as measured from just say $10,000, yeah, of course we could get to a 10x ROI, but as measured from any January 1st of any year to the end of that year, there's a good chance that we actually don't see an ROI of 10x, because if we slowly move to 20K over the next year, and let's say we start 2022 at 20K, well, a 10x would put it at $200,000, and I really don't think that Bitcoin will make it to $200,000 this market cycle. I think it'll be closer to $100,000 than to $200,000, and this is just from what we've looked at in terms of diminishing returns and also lengthening cycles, and also recognizing that it's going to take a lot more volume to continue to push it up this curve. It's a lot easier for a coin to go from a market cap of say 1 million to 10 million than it is to go from 100 billion to a trillion. Okay, so there's a huge difference there. So with that in mind, there's if 2021 is an accumulation phase, 2022 could also theoretically be an accumulation phase as measured in this manner, right? Because if 2022, if we see the price of Bitcoin go from like $20,000 to $50,000, then we're still only looking at a 2.5x, which would still fall within this band, okay? So it all depends on exactly where the price is on each January 1st as measured in this manner. But you get the idea that actually to realize a 10x ROI from January 1st of any given year will be a lot harder to do this market cycle than it was in the past. And I would anticipate at the very least 2021 being another accumulation year where we're still within this regime over here. And even with that said, 2022 could also be within this regime, okay? There's less likely. It could easily pop out at, a 3x ROI or higher, especially, if you imagine if we end 2021, let's suppose we end 2021 at $14,000, and then we end 2022 at $42,000, okay, then that's a 3x ROI, and then it puts us above that 2.6 upper limit that we've seen that is actually capped by the 2022 market. So, of course, it always depends on exactly what the price is any given year. Another example would be, well, what if the price crashes in the next quarter and we go back to the 200-week moving average? Let's say we go back to around $7,000 at the time. And then if we go back to $7,000, then there's a much higher probability that next year we'll see a higher ROI, closer to that 2.6, to try to get us back closer to that $20,000. So I understand that there's a lot of arbitrary metrics involved in this type of video where I'm measuring it from year to date for any given year. But again, it's just one more thing we can add to our toolbox to try to identify, okay, where are we within this cycle? And it looks like, to me, the accumulation phases will likely get longer, and as you can see, the ROI will likely decrease. I mean, the 2013 bull had a higher ending ROI, but the 2011 one had one that was in the middle that reached 100x or more. Okay, so now what we want to do is just go through the cycle, recognize that in this cycle, whether it be 2022, 2023, 2024, I tend to think 2023, but obviously it could be off a little bit. We'll probably fill in some here too. Okay, we'll probably have at least 1 year where the ROI of Bitcoin will be between 3 and 10. Okay, at least 1 year is what I would guess. But of course, depending on exactly how the bubble plays out, it really is anyone's guess at that point as to where it would end up exactly. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys like the content? If you do, please subscribe to the channel. We also have the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below, as well as the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. If you want access to the premium list, you can check it out at my website. You can find it in the link below. You get access to a weekly premium video, a weekly premium report, a private Telegram chat room, a private Telegram alert group, which is where I put my candid thoughts on the market, a risk dashboard, which is what I use to trade, and a dynamic DCA strategy dashboard, which is what you can use to better understand selling strategies throughout this market cycle. So if you guys like it, check it out, intothecryptoverse.com. Please subscribe to the channel at the very least. Give the video a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. What do you think about the video? You can complain about how arbitrary it is, and I can't really respond in a meaningful way to that, because you would be right, it is arbitrary. But again, this is just one more video that we have on the channel. So I think that'll wrap it up for the video. Let me know what you guys think. Subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.